The ground beneath Jharia has burned for over a century. Surface temperatures reach 190 degrees Celsius. Carbon monoxide peaks at lethal concentrations. Every day, workers walk into it for $4, 92% of them, with nothing but a verbal agreement. They are paid to breathe fire. But the question worth asking isn't why they do it. It's what kind of economic system made inhaling poison a rational trade for food. The surface temperatures in the Jharia coalfields can reach 190 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt footwear and cause third-degree burns in seconds. Thermographic surveys confirm these readings at the pit edge, while infrared cameras trace the flow of heat across unstable ground. But radiant heat is only one dimension of risk. Portable gas detectors clipped to miners' belts routinely register toxic carbon monoxide levels as high as 190 parts per million, nearly double the occupational safety limit. At these concentrations, loss of consciousness can occur within minutes. Methane released from fractured coal seams peaks at 4.8% by volume, approaching the lower explosive limit. Even routine shifts carry the possibility of sudden ignition, especially during night hours when gas accumulates in poorly ventilated galleries. The ground itself is in motion. High-resolution LiDAR mapping reveals 48 active subsidence zones across informal mining corridors, with depressions as deep as half a meter forming overnight. Roof collapses and fissures threaten not only miners, but also the homes and schools built above abandoned shafts. These risks, including heat, toxic gas, and ground instability, interact with each other, creating a multidimensional hazard environment. This complexity is captured in what researchers call the Composite Risk Index, which weights each threat based on field measurements and expert consensus. In Jharia's core fire zone, the index approaches 0.89, on a scale where 1.0 represents maximum danger. Even on the fringes, scores rarely fall below 0.34. Quantifying risk at this level makes clear that danger is not an accident or a matter of individual error. It is a structural feature of the work itself, a set of physical conditions that define what it means to participate in this market. Every shift is a negotiation between exposure and survival, measured in degrees, parts per million, and the slow movement of the ground beneath. Earnings in Jharia's informal coal mines are calibrated to risk, not to contracts or legal protections. Most miners work on a verbal promise, with 92% of wage agreements made orally and settled at the end of each shift. There are no written contracts, no formal employer, and no insurance, just a daily calculation of exposure traded for cash. The median daily income stands at 340 rupees, a sum that sits below India's national average for day labor, but remains essential for household survival in this region. For many, this is the only reliable source of cash income, especially after land is lost to subsidence or fire. Every shift is a micro-risk exchange. Time spent in the fire zone is measured against the day's food budget, school fees, and the cost of medicine. The absence of formal employment means that if a miner is injured or falls ill, there is no compensation, no paid leave, and no recourse to Social Security. Instead, the only certainty is that the next day's work will again be negotiated, task by task, with payment dependent on output and the middleman's discretion. Middlemen serve as the key brokers in this exchange. They set the price for each load, advance small loans at high interest, and absorb a share of the margin that would otherwise go to the worker. Their role is structural, not incidental. By providing credit and controlling access to buyers, they anchor the risk market in place. The result is a system where exposure is commodified, and the absence of legal protections is a feature, not a bug. This is not a temporary workaround. It is the architecture of risk that defines the economic logic of Jharia's informal coal sector. Night in Jharia signals the start of extraction. From 8 p.m. to 2 a.m., Crews gather at the edge of the coal pits, drawn by cooler air but shadowed by rising carbon monoxide and methane. The work is methodical. Hand tools and improvised explosives break coal from exposed seams, often without formal guidelines. Each chunk is loaded into bamboo baskets, 12 kilograms at capacity, the heaviest a person can manage, again and again across scorched, uneven ground. Baskets ride on heads or shoulders, sometimes balanced on makeshift carts, along unpaved tracks that twist through fissures and ground weakened by fire. The distance from pit to collection point can stretch for kilometers, each trip lengthening exposure to toxic air and unstable earth. A shift is measured not by hours, but by the number of baskets delivered. Dozens of trips fill the night, with only quick stops to clear debris or wait out gas. Payment comes at dawn, calculated by total weight moved, not time spent. The pace is relentless, and every extra trip increases the risk of gas exposure, collapse, or equipment failure. Here, risk is woven into the workflow, each basket a unit of both survival and danger. Families in Jharia's coal fields often begin mining together, with children learning the routines of extraction alongside parents and siblings. Over time, the extraordinary hazards of the fire zone become ordinary facts of daily life. This process is known as risk habituation, a gradual adjustment to constant threat, where repeated exposure to danger reduces emotional response and recalibrates what feels normal. In household surveys, 71% of miners report persistent anxiety about fire or collapse, yet most continue to work without visible distress. The line between vigilance and acceptance blurs as survival depends on suppressing fear. For many, the psychological toll is cumulative. Nearly half of surveyed miners screen positive for depressive symptoms, reflecting the mental cost of prolonged uncertainty and exposure. The absence of contracts or insurance means each shift is a fresh negotiation, and the lack of alternatives reinforces the need to adapt. Children observe and absorb these patterns, inheriting not only the work, but the mindset required to endure it. Risk habituation becomes a family trait, passed down as a coping mechanism in a system where opting out is rarely an option. In this risk architecture, normalization of danger is not a failure of awareness. It is a rational response to structural incentives that make continued exposure the default path for survival. Enforcement in Jharia follows a familiar script: periodic crackdowns, demolition of illegal pits, and promises of relocation. Yet beneath the surface, these actions rarely reduce risk. They simply move it. Election years bring a surge of visible enforcement, with the Jharkhand State Mining Department and the Jharia Rehabilitation and Development Authority issuing demolition orders and seizing equipment. Spatial analysis shows that 71% of these interventions happen away from the most hazardous fire fronts, leaving the core danger untouched. The relocation program, managed by the JRDA, aims to move 42,000 households by 2030. So far, only 23% have been resettled, and most new sites lack access to stable work or basic services. As a result, many families return to informal mining, often reopening pits just beyond the reach of enforcement. Satellite data show the fire-affected area has grown from 10.4 to 12 square kilometers since 2010, with projections reaching 18 square kilometers by 2035. Each crackdown displaces miners laterally, prompting fresh digging at the fire's edge and accelerating the spread of underground combustion. The intended solution, removal of risk, becomes instead a redistribution, reinforcing a feedback loop where policy actions and environmental hazards escalate together. The risk architecture is not dismantled, it is rearranged, keeping exposure and survival tightly linked. Across high-risk, informal economies, the power of middlemen is a constant. In Jharia, these brokers occupy a structural position between extraction and sale, capturing margins that far exceed the daily earnings of those who face the hazards directly. For every ton of coal moved through the informal chain, middlemen routinely capture a margin of 30,000 rupees, roughly 10% of the final sale price. This figure is not an outlier. In artisanal gold mining, e-waste recycling, and ship breaking, intermediaries extract margins of 15 to 30%, leveraging control over credit, market access, and price information. The economic logic is straightforward. Miners and collectors, operating without contracts or insurance, bear the direct risk, exposure to toxic gases, ground collapse, and long-term health loss. Middlemen, by contrast, provide liquidity and connections to formal buyers, but remain insulated from physical danger. The margin they extract is justified as compensation for transport, storage, and loan risk. Yet the asymmetry is pronounced. A single broker's daily profit from coal can exceed the combined income of several mining households. This pattern is not unique to coal. In the informal gold trade of West Africa and the e-waste yards of South Asia, intermediaries shape the market by controlling information and extending high-interest credit. Workers at the base of these systems routinely earn less than a fifth of the final product's value, while absorbing nearly all the health and safety risk. The result is a risk architecture in which exposure is commodified and profit is concentrated in the hands of those who never enter the hazard zone. Such structures persist not by accident, but by design, wherever formal regulation is weak and the demand for raw materials remains strong. These patterns link artisanal mining, e-waste processing, and shipbreaking, and they show how exposure becomes a tradable input and how profit concentrates away from the hazard. Today, informal risk markets like Jharia's persist wherever poverty outpaces protection and demand ignores consequence. As India's energy appetite grows, these architectures of risk quietly expand. When inhaling toxins becomes a calculated job, the true cost of coal is not just measured in tons, but in trades of survival.